Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to go ahead and give people a couple minutes to get started. So we're going to start at 2 minutes past the hour. So just please sit tight. Thank you for attending today. And we will impart some great information to you. Hello, everybody. It's the top of the hour, but I'm going to give everybody a couple minutes to go to join up. So if you've just joined us, welcome, and sit tight, and we'll go ahead and get started in 2 minutes. Hello, everybody. Again, welcome to today's webinar, Protecting Your Company and Your Department of Defense Contracts. My name is Kevin Hancock. I'm the Director of Sales Engineering here at Exostar, and I'll be the host for today's webinar. Before we get started, just want to cover a few housekeeping items. So today's webinar is scheduled to last 45 minutes to 1 hour. That will include a Q&A session at the end. Those questions that came in, or those questions that we'll be answering, are those that were submitted prior to the event when you signed up, if you chose to do so. If for some reason there's an outage during today's presentation, just go ahead and wait for a minute and then refresh the page that you were on, and that should clear everything up and get and restart you into the webinar. For your convenience, there is a link in the YouTube description to a glossary of commonly used terms. Right, in this space, right, government regulations and NIST and CMMC, there are a ton of acronyms. Some of those I just threw out, so please use that as needed. We will be recording today's webinar. It'll be available on demand via the Exostar resource library. That's available at our website, www.exostar.com/resources. It'll be available post this event, and it's also available through that YouTube link that you received via email. If you'd like to speak with one of our industry experts or request a copy of the slide deck that we'll be using today, please reach out to us at cmmc-team@exostar.com. There's a live chat feature at our website, www.exostar.com, that can also provide that information for you. So let's go ahead and get started. Just a reminder, again, as we start this webinar, we're going to be discussing the Policy Pro application as part of today's webinar. If you'd like to follow along with that, we encourage you to sign up for a free trial. If you'd like to get that trial account started, or if you already have one, please bring up the application. If you'd like to get that trial account, please see the link in the YouTube description. It takes about 2 minutes to sign up. So on today's session, I'll be joined by Sean Fornwalt. Sean serves as the Director of the Client Technical Support Department at ISMS Solutions. He's part of the ISMS Application team, and he's a member of the Policy Pro Development and Quality Assurance team. Sean will be taking us through today's session and will be working with me to answer the questions at the end of the session. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sean.
All right, thank you very much, Kevin. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking a look at the Policy Pro platform, how we can use it, what the different tools are within it, and how we can start working towards a full suite of cybersecurity policies for our organization. So first thing we're going to do after we've signed up for either the free trial or we've gotten our subscription for the year, we're going to sign in using our email and then the password that we created through the registration process. The first thing that we're always going to come to when we log into the Policy Pro platform is that it's going to ask us to decide or to choose which of the standards we want to work on during this session. Now, you can make this choice later on in the platform, so it's not a binding choice, and you can move back and forth fairly easily once we're in the platform itself. And I just want to point out that we are working on an update for the 2.0 version of CMMC, but we're going to touch that more in the question and answer session of today's webinar. So for right now, we're going to hop into the 171 side of the platform because this is the current requirement for all DoD contractors with a DPARS clause in their contracts. So once we get in, we come to what we call our dashboard. This is going to be some high-level information about what we've been doing in the platform, as well as giving us some guidance as to where we may want to start working once we're in. So we have up top where it has two simple questions. It's just saying, do you have policies or do you need assistance creating them? You want to go to the policy builder. If you already have policies, you can take them to the policy assessment section, and then you can get a score based on the relevance to the standard, and it will give you some ideas of if you're covering all the major ideas that have to be covered, what you may be missing, and where those can be found within the policy itself. The next part we have here is our Bloomberg Government Analysis. This is just a link to a bunch of Bloomberg Government Analysis articles that are around federal contracting, and it allows you to educate yourself as to the current happenings in federal contracting. Now, you will receive a weekly newsletter on this with the most relevant and most recent articles. You can come in, you don't have to log into another website, you don't have to make any kind of additional payment. It's here for you to use as part of the platform. And then we have our document relevance dashboard. And what this is going to show us is all of the different documents that we have uploaded for assessment, what they got as a score, where their Kenny numbers are at, and we'll get into all the Kenny stuff in just a minute. But this is going to show us at a high level where our documents that we've uploaded for assessment currently are. We can also select any one of these and click through to go through or to the policy assessment area, and that we'll go into that in just a minute here. And then the last thing on our dashboard is our chat functionality. This is available on all the different parts of the platform with excluding the policy builder in its current form. This will allow you to reach out to one of our support reps at our West Virginia call center, and you're able to ask questions about the platform and where you can find information throughout it. So the folks on the chat aren't going to give advice as to the substance of what your policy should be, but they're going to guide you in the operation of the platform and finding the resources so you can determine that on your own. So the first thing that I want to show everyone today is our policy builder. Whether you have policies that are already or you're looking at creating new policies, going into our policy builder and taking a look at our templates can be a great place to start. Now, each of these, and we're going to go and select our policy family of what we want to work on today. So because every trial has access to the access control policy and is able to export it, that's what we're going to look at today. So each of our sections here for, per policy family will have three three little areas that we want to go over first before we get into the template. The prepare stage here is going to give us some high-level information about what this particular policy family is going to be covering, as well as to, what we may want to start bringing together. Our gather section rather is a primer list of documents that you may already possess that are going to be helpful in the answering of the compliance questions of this policy family. Our consult section, because we understand that this is not simply an IT problem, this is a whole of business problem, that everyone is going to be affected by it. So it's giving you an idea of who you're going to want to talk to if you have questions about this particular policy family and the controls contained within. Once we have a grasp of what we're going to be doing, what we need to bring together, and who we should be talking to, we're going to go ahead and click our Get Started button right here in the lower right-hand corner. Now we're going to be inside of our policy builder proper. This is where we have all the different sections, all the different controls, and everything put so that we can use it to build out our own policy documentation. So up at the top, we do have a couple of housekeeping items. We have our organization name. This is determined at the point of registration, but if you need to have it changed for whatever the reason may be, whether the company was, purchased or merged into another company, or there's a simple misspelling when you were going to key it in. Give our folks at our call center a quick call, send them a chat. We'll be able to fix that for you relatively quickly. But the name that is right here under the organization will also be put throughout the documentation of the template where it would be applicable. And I'll point that out as we go through it. The next one is going to be our department, and this is typically going to be who is responsible for the maintenance of this particular policy. In this case, we're putting that it's an IT security department thing. If we want to change that, all we have to do is make the appropriate change and click out of it. It will save itself for insertion into the platform later. The next thing that we're looking at here is our issue date. This allows us to determine when we're going to be looking at, or when this particular policy was issued, and it helps to create an audit trail showing that you have multiple iterations of a policy as you modify it, to meet the current situation that you're facing. The next is our approved by. We can put in who the person approving this, whether it is a committee, a group, or an individual. And then our tracking number simply works as a versioning number for your document. So with all the housekeeping out of the way, we're now going to step into the language of the policy itself. So we've broken out and put here a purpose. Why are we writing this particular document? And because the DoD said I had to, isn't really going to cut it. So we put in some boilerplate language that you can take and either adopt or you can modify it so that it best reflects your organization and the reasons behind why you're putting forth an access control policy in this particular case. If we want to make a change, we're going to click on this little black circle with the white pencil icon in it. That will open up a text editor where we can make any changes that are necessary. So we'll select a couple of words here and we'll just bold it so it's easy to see. So as soon as we save that, it is reflected, and any change that we may make, will be reflected here for both the purpose and the scope. And that does bring us next to our scope. We need to determine what this is going to be covering and who has to adhere to it. So again, we've provided boilerplate language. You can adopt it as is, or you can modify it so that it better reflects your organization. Because at the end of the day, whatever policies you write have to reflect what your organization is doing. Because again, you're saying these are the rules that we have to follow as an organization when it comes to our cybersecurity. So they should be the rules that you're actually following. So any changes that are required to meet that goal would be, changes that you would want to make to the template. But once we've determined why we're writing it and who it's going to be affecting, we're going to jump down into the controls themselves. So for the current NIST side of the platform here, we have grouped together related controls. So the point 2 here derives from the point 1, so they're grouped together because they're covering a related area. What we can do is we can go over and look at the number. We have the exact language from the standard itself so that we don't have to be flipping back and forth. We have it right in front of us. And then our guidelines is going to give us an idea of what this particular control is going to be covering. So just like with the purpose or the scope, we're going to click on the edit button. We can expand this out to make it bigger so we can see it better. And then we clicked on it outside of it and didn't make a change, so it went away on us here. So if we go ahead and just let that there, we can now see that all the language from the 3.1.1 control is here. But again, there are a couple of areas that are missing things. Maybe they're not precisely how your organization does it. And this is where you're going to make the customizations and changes so that it does reflect what your organization is doing. So again, we can go through this. Essentially will serve as a skeletal wireform that you can then add into to build out your organization's policy around access control or whatever other policy family you're working on in the platform. So we're going to go ahead, we'll just click the save button there, and you'll see that the timestamp updates to tell us that yes, there was a change to this particular section on this date at this time GMT and the user that made the change. Once we've gone through and we've made all the edits that we want to in the text editor here, now again, you can't put in images or spreadsheets or anything overly complicated. That you would be better served using in Microsoft Word or maybe Pages or another word processor locally. So what we can do is we can now export this template, right? We've made the appropriate changes that we wanted to make here, and now we want to have the document for ourselves. So we're going to come down to the lower right-hand corner. We have a black square with an upward facing white arrow, and this is going to be our export button. Once we click this button, you'll see that it pops up a notification saying that we have exported it and that we now have it on our local system. So what we're going to do from here is from our download, because again, this comes to our default download folder as set by our browser. So in my case, it is my downloads folder. In your case, it may go somewhere else, depending upon how your browser is set up to save documentation. Now, each of these will download in a protected format, so you will need to enable editing, and we'll just zoom in here so everyone can see it. So all of that housekeeping that we did at the top of the policy builder comes out in this table at the top of the first page. This is not strictly a requirement for this policy, but it's something to help us keep track of when this document was produced, when it was approved, who approved it, and so on. But if we really don't like it, we can just go ahead and right click and we can completely remove it. It doesn't have to be there. It's just something that helps keep track of a couple of different housekeeping items. So you can remove it because now this is your policy. You can change the way it's structured. You can change the language of it. Whatever you need to do to make your policy be in line with what your organization is doing is what you should be doing, right? But as you can see, we have our purpose, we have our scope, and then we have our first control. Now, a lot of folks have asked me, why do you have the language of the control in the policy itself? And from working with different auditors and consultants and assessors, we found that having it structured in this way does two things. One, it helps to ensure that you're covering everything that you have to for a particular control. The other thing that it's doing is that it's letting your assessor or auditor know everything to do with this particular control can be found in this part of the document. They don't have to read through 110 pages of documentation and then determine, well, did they meet this requirement? Did they meet this here? I have to go read it again. We're saying there are 6 requirements for 3.1.1. Everything about that is going to be right here. So the auditor doesn't have to bounce around. They don't have to jump around it and try to figure it out. You're explicitly telling them everything about this is right here. And I can't say that it will speed up the audit, but it may make it simpler for your assessor or auditor to go through your documentation. So once we've done all this, we've made the changes that we want to make, we're going to go back and we're going to assess this document against the standard. So we're going to close our Policy Builder tab, and then we're going to go to our Policy Assessment tab. We're going to click on this, and we have each of the policy families laid out. You just simply select the one that you want to upload, and then you can go ahead and click the Upload Documents button. Once we do this, we will get our upload queue. We're going to attach a document by clicking the green button here, and it's going to go into our File Explorer, and we're going to select the document that we want to assess. We can add multiple documents in here, and it will aggregate them together and assess them as though it was a singular document. We can also clear out by clicking the Clear Selected, but because I have the document that I want to assess, I'm going to hit the Submit button. Once we do that, we have to wait for the scoring algorithms and all the back-end magic to do its job, and it's going to come out and tell us where this particular document falls according to the standard. So if we're looking at this, we can say, okay, I got a 70.1%. Scholastically or academically, not fantastic. It's about average. However, we don't score on an academic scale. We go by a percentage of relevance to the standard itself. So what this 70% is telling us is that this document is covering roughly 70% of the items that need to be covered in this particular policy family. So we can say this is actually a pretty good document. The next thing that we see here is going to be our model similarity, because our relevance is tied directly to our score, and it's saying that we're covering a majority of the items. The model similarity and the word count, while they don't affect the score, massively, they have a minor effect on them, but not enough to really skew it one way or the other, are simply checks that we put in to say, if you're using one of our templates, have you modified it appropriately so that it's no longer just a template document, it is an actual policy for your organization. In this case, we can say that yes, this document has been modified to that point. It's no longer considered a template document. The word count is there to say you're not going to cover access control in 500 words. You may need to expand it, but as you can see, this document is, long enough to adequately cover what has to be covered in this particular policy. Now, that's all well and good. We can say, yeah, we have a pretty good document. It's, we've customized it enough, it's long enough, it's covering most of the items, but how do I know what I may have missed? And the way we can figure that out is we can come down here to our detailed scorecard link. We're going to click that. It will pop up a pop-up window comes up, and now we can see all the information that we've already gotten with an additional section for our Kenny. And I did mention that before from the dashboard, and we're going to go in and explain precisely what the Kennys are and how we can use them. So our Kennys are what are called key elements not included. So we've gone through the documentation with our scoring algorithms and machine learning and said, these items should be in here, but we're not quite sure that they're being covered. You want to go back and double check. So in the case of Kennys, we do have two separate types. We have our general policy Kennys that are right here. These are different, key concepts that are typically found in a document of this type, but don't have a direct mapping to the standard itself. So it's more of a recommendation or a recommended section. On the other side of that, we have our control-specific Kennys. These are ones that are directly mapped to a particular control within this particular policy family. So what we can see here is we have CUI and non-public information, and it should be in 3.1.22. So we now know precisely where in the document it should be, and because of the organization structure that we've used, we can simply do a Control F, put in a 22, and it will bring us right to that control in the document. So again, Part of the reason we have this structure is so that it is easier to navigate through to make sure that you're covering what you have to cover in your documentation. So what we have here is we're going over publicly accessible content and what our policy document is saying, or how we're handling it according to our policy. So we're designating individuals authorized to post information. All right, sounds good. We're training those folks so that they know what they can and can't post on a public information system. And you may be wondering, how am I knowing if I'm hitting all the points that I have to hit? What we can also do, and we do have the link in two places here. We have it right here at the bottom of each of the different Kenny descriptions. And we also have one on the left-hand navigation looking at the reference library. So what we can do is we can come in here and I can look at the 171A. So these are the requirements for the 171. And what I can do here is I can go and do a search and do a 0.22. Zoom in here and you'll see right here we have 3.1.22 security requirements. So we have 5 different requirements that we have to meet according to the DoD. The first thing that we have to do is identify the people who are authorized to post on publicly accessible systems. Well, if we go and take a look here, that's precisely what we're doing, right? We've designated individuals, we have it separately noted who they are and everything else. Okay, we've hit the first requirement. Now we're going to look at the next one. We have procedures to ensure that they are not posted or processed on publicly accessible systems, right? So we're training our folks so that they know. And then we have our review processes. One is prior to posting and one is post posting. And as we can see, we have a review process right here prior to posting for any content, and that we're also reviewing the currently posted content as well. So we are going through and hitting all of these different marks. So why did the Kenny pop up? Sometimes the Kenny will pop up because it's not worded exactly enough, or you use different language, and that doesn't mean that it shouldn't have been reviewed. We're just saying, hey, we're not 100% sure you've covered this. Please go back and check. And if your documentation, your way of handling this meets all the requirements from the 171A, and it meshes well with the organization, then you should be okay. Just because you get a Kenny doesn't mean you have to have some form of a response to it. You just have to make sure that you're covering it adequately. Because again, we all have the same requirements. How we get there will be unique to your organization. So with that in mind, we're going to hop right back here to the Policy Pro platform. As we can see in a little bit more depth here, I want to touch on the reference library. We do have this broken down by policy family. So if you're working on access control, you can go to access control, and it has a group of different of the 800 series of documents that you can review to make sure that you're understanding what what you should be doing in this particular case. So for example, we can go to the 800-113. This is going to be the official NIST guide on secure socket level or secure socket layer VPNs. So we can go into this document, we can read up on what we need to know about VPNs. We can come in here, go right to the table of contents, and we can start wherever we want. We want to talk about the transport layer, boring technical stuff. We want to look at, whatever we need to brush up on, we can find it, and then we can go and take a look at it. So if we look at architecture, we jump right to that section of the document. And again, all of these 800 series documents, you're leaving Policy Pro and you're going to the NIST.gov site where they reside. We make no claim of ownership or authorship. This is the official guide from NIST about whatever the topic is. So it's the best place to get the information to make the right decision for your organization. Now, the last thing that I do want to point out here before we go over to the Q&A section is that I had mentioned that we can bounce back and forth. We can by clicking on this link here. Because we're currently in NIST, we can hop over to the CMMC. You can see that the domain names have changed, and we can always hop back as well. But the one thing that we have for the NIST side of the platform that we don't quite have for the CMMC, and this is more of a timing and implementation issue, is the Ask the Auditor. Because NIST has been around for a number of years, we sat down with Dr. Wassilina, who is an auditor and consultant when it comes to 171, and we said, our users are asking these questions quite frequently. Could you give us your opinion, your insight into this question? And we set up a series of videos where we sat down with Dr. Wassilina and said, hey, here's the question, give us your answer. We're not going to edit it, we're not going to change it, we don't want you to promote anything. Give us an answer as though you were speaking to one of your consultant clients. And that's what he did. So if you have a question like, who should I have present at an audit? Do I need my attorney there? He'll go into that and give you his viewpoint from his experience. And then that pretty much covers all the different sections of the Policy Pro platform. I will leave us though with our support information. So if at any time you have any issues with the platform, it's not working correctly, you can't find what you're looking for, please reach out to our support staff in West Virginia. We're there from 8 in the morning Eastern Standard to about 10 p.m. Eastern Standard. The hours on it say 9 to 8, but I have people there to make sure that if you have a question, we're there to answer it and get back to you and make sure that the product works the best it can for you and your organization. But with that, I will turn it back over to Kevin, and we can go through some of the questions that were posed by our participants.
Great, thanks, Sean. So let me share my desktop back. So before I dive into the Q&A, just let me put a plug out there to please fill out the exit poll. You will see a link in the YouTube description to complete that. We use this to determine what topics you want to hear about and to help us make our webinars better. So we'd really appreciate that. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the QA. So I'm going to take the first one because it said, are there registered practitioners to assist in certification preparations? So there are a number of practitioners out there. Exostar does maintain a partner listing, if you will, of those partners who work in this space. So if you go to our website, exostar.com, go to /partners, you'll see the different types. Click on CMMC, and you'll get a list of the partners who can perform, if you will, services around NIST 800-171 and CMMC, both auditing and just assistance in this. Go back to the presentation. So let's see. So how does NIST apply to companies who handle all CUI in hard copy? How about that one, Sean?
Again, I mean, the title of the document for 171 is, protecting CUI. It doesn't specify about the form that it takes, just that, just like you would take your hard copy tax return and put it in a safe, you should be doing the same with CUI, whether it's in the digital form or it's in the hard copy form.
Right. There is a section on physical security. So please pay attention to that section when filling out your policies.
And the other thing to keep in mind too, Kevin, is that the physical security part of 171 also covers environmental controls as well.
Right. Absolutely.
Because if it's a hard copy and the bathroom upstairs floods and it's right over your file room,
Yep.
it'll destroy a server and it will destroy a hard copy just the same.
Let's see. So next, how is CMMC 2 different from CMMC 1? Is it more lenient on smaller companies?
It is and it isn't. a couple of the major changes that occurred with the 2.0 is that they removed the maturity level documentation. So the 3 additional documents that you needed for each domain are no longer required, right?
Right.
And what they're doing is they're trying to mirror it against the 171 because that has been the existing standard that all DoD contractors have been required to be compliant with. So they're saying just finish out what you've been required to do, and there's no extra stuff added to it.
Right.
Now, as far as making it easier for smaller firms, the one thing that they also changed is the way that they quote unquote certify your compliance. If you're a level 1, right, you still have the 17 practices that you have to do. However, instead of going through the triennial third-party assessment, you can just self-attest on an annual basis that you are compliant. And then with the level 2, which is replacing the old level 3, you know, you have the 110 controls from the 171, but they're kind of splitting the group. If you have a prioritized or highly critical or sensitive contract, you have to go through the triennial third-party assessment. If you have a non-prioritized, or a less critical contract, you can annually self-attest, but it does have to be signed off by a senior executive from the organization.
Right.
And then they're going to merge those 2 groups together as time goes on to kind of smooth the implementation curve of the new standard.
Great. Thanks. So hopefully that this will be pretty self-explanatory after your presentation. So the next question was how to set up CMMC with low cost. Very small business, don't have resources to hire any technical people.
So again, I mean, Policy Pro, it's not overly expensive, but it's not dirt cheap either. So it goes for about $14.99 right now. There are incentives available. If you give, the sales folks at Exo or our sales folks a call, they can try to work in an incentive for you. But most templates that we were looking at and most services would sell you a template for, $1,200. And
Right.
that's for one policy family. That wasn't for all 14
All
of them.
14, exactly.
And
Yep.
that didn't have any form of assessment. It didn't have a reference library. So Policy Pro really stepped into that void to say, here's templates, here's assessment, here's resources at a reasonable, yearly subscription.
Right.
And people do ask me quite frequently, like, why do you do a subscription model for templates? And the 2.0 brings that into, crystal clarity for at least myself, that we set up as, originally I just had the 171. And then when CMMC came out, we built out a module for that. And then when the CMMC changed, we're currently working on the changes to that. So we're constantly evolving and updating the templates and the scoring and the whole product to really be there as, hey, we did this, but there was a change. Let me go check out what the templates say. Let me go see what the scoring says. And we make those adjustments to help the user stay on top of the changes that come in the future.
Absolutely. And that is the beauty of a SaaS application, right? It evolves as the rules and regulations change. The application itself will stay up to date, so you don't have to throw away any work that you did previously. The application will take that part for you.
Right. And we do like to send out, information about it. And it does tie right into what you're going into with
Yep.
CA.
Yep. And that's why I took this opportunity. So we do have, Exostar has 2 applications that really help you in this space, both Policy Pro and Certification Assistant. Right? Policy Pro, as Sean discussed, it's that these are companion applications, right? Policy Pro, as you just saw, saves you time and resources as you build and revise your security policies in line with NIST 800 171. Where Certification Assistant delivers a self-guided, step-by-step platform for streamlining the implementation of your controls and policies. It allows you to see your SSPs and your POAMs and work towards closing those out. And then, if you will, keeping those robust as you need to and as you revise these going forward.
Because
So,
just to clarify that point, Kevin, is that even though you may have written policies and implemented them, you are still required to review them. So
right.
you have to go back and make sure that you're set up to deal with the current threats that you're dealing with, not just the ones you dealt with last year.
Yep. Alrighty. So let's go to the next question here. Let's see. So I was under the impression that all vendors except products had to have a SPURS score. Others told me that only vendors who knowingly will handle CUI need to have a SPURS score. Which is it?
If you have federal contracting information or CUI, you need to have a SPURS score.
Yep. Thank
So
you.
essentially, if you have a FAR or a DFARS clause, you should be entering in your SPURS score. And what I want to also point out is that it's not a hard and fast score, right? So
Right.
if you submit a score that say you got a 35 out of 110, means you're not doing too terrible, but you're not doing too great. You can then make changes, implement new controls, and then reassess yourself and then submit that score, because that will show that you are actively making changes for the better for your organization. And that's what they want to see.
Right. Absolutely. Let's see. So we get this question almost every webinar, right? So is this a mandatory requirement by Exostar or the customer? So, this is a federal contract requirement. So if you handle federal contracts, you typically have a clause in there that you've got to sign up for the DFARS clauses and things like that. And that's what these tie to. It's ensuring that you have the controls and policies necessary to um, to perform a federal contract.
And more specifically, I mean, the whole point behind the 171 is to protect CUI.
Right.
That's truly what the DoD is trying to protect, is their intellectual property, or CUI. Because if that information gets out, then the adversarial nations, adversarial groups can counteract the technology that our warfighters use to give them an advantage on the modern battlefield. So without that advantage, it's kind of one of those that you want to protect those men and women who have made that dedication to our country by doing some
Absolutely.
very simple cybersecurity, controls.
Exactly. Let's see. Okay, so another SPURS question. Should we submit our SPURS score if we do not have a system security plan fully documented?
Yes,
Yes.
because again, you can resubmit at a later point in time when you may have completed that,
Right.
and you'll have a higher score, which then, because essentially what the SPURS score does is it allows contracting officers to at a glance determine how trustworthy, or how good are these folks about protecting data that we're giving them. So it's, how much confidence can that contracting officer have if, you have three people bidding on a contract, one of them has a really low score and one of them has a really high score. I can kind of tell you who I'm going to pick as a contracting officer.
Sure. Let's see. Before we get the next one, just wanted to remind people that we do have upcoming events. So we had one right before the holidays. That's the one you see up there. That's on demand. We also have a number of other resources available to you. And if you request this slide deck, you'll have these links available for you. And as we discussed, both Policy Pro and Certification System have free trials. Sorry, Certification Assistant. Both have free trials, and those are available for sign up at those links as well. So let's go back into the questions here. Let's see. So what documentation is required by NIST 800-171 besides an SSP and POAM? Does each requirement also require a documented procedure, or is being able to show evidence of implementing the requirement enough?
Well, here's the thing, and if we go back to the 171A, right, which is actually, if you go to the CMMC 2.0 website with the DoD, and you go to their documentation page, they have the new assessment guides for levels 1 and 2, right? And they're
Right.
essentially a rewrite of the old 171A. But that will spell out specifically what requirements each control or practice, depending upon how you're looking at it, requires, right? So when we were going over with the Policy Pro demonstration about, CUI on non-public or on publicly accessible systems, it spelled out the 5 different requirements that you have to meet. You should
Right.
have a policy written around them because that's your guiding rule.
Yep.
Then you should have them implemented, and you should be testing that implementation and having evidence of that implementation. Not
Right.
just because you're trying to prove to the DoD you're compliant, because it's good for your business as well. If you know how things are being done, you can track them. You can see where its efficiency is. Is it costing you more money than it's worth? Do we need to make a change? Do we have to update? All these things are aided by additional documentation. So anytime that someone asks me about what should I document, everything.
Yeah,
Doesn't
and that
really
really,
happen that way, but
right. No, it
document
doesn't.
everything.
Right. And it does lead that, right? You have to be able to show proof that that you're following these procedures. You've got to show that that what you do is right. And the way you show that is against your stated policies. It's really tough to say, okay, NIST asked for this and yeah, we do that. That doesn't really cut it.
Well, the other thing that you have to consider too is that part of the assessment methodology, there's 3 different ways that an assessor or an auditor can, determine if you're following or if you're compliant. The one, they can examine your documentation. That's all
Right.
your evidence, your, log printouts, your everything from policy on. They can interview your staff, right? So if I
Yep.
say that, Jim is in charge of, you know, monitoring the seam product that we have, okay, is he trained on how to do that? Can he answer an auditor's questions about his roles and responsibilities around that, that that control? And then the third one is that they can actually test your system. And as an IT administrator, and just, that's the last thing I want, is to get somebody else
Right.
access to my system. So they have to match 2 of the 3, right? They have to pass you on 2 of the 3. So having good policy documentation, good implementation documentation, a good SSP, it fulfills the first one. Proper training, proper, retraining to make sure that people are current with what the policies are and what their roles and responsibilities are,
Yep.
covers the second one. So it makes the whole process much easier if you're documenting everything and you're training your people to understand their roles and responsibilities.
Good point. Let's see. So where can I find a mapping of the CMC1 to CMMC2 policy controls?
That is going to be on the DoD's website for the CMMC 2.0 under the documentation tab.
All
And they will
right.
have a mapping for you directly that will show you the CMMC 1.02 to the 2.0.
Okay. Great. And I think that kind of brings us to the end. So want to thank everybody. Remind you to please fill out that exit poll. Again, the link's there in the YouTube description. Please join us in some of our next sessions that are coming up if you'd like some additional information. And again, have a great week. And we thank you for joining us.
And just
Thanks so
real
much.
quick, Kevin, shameless
Yeah.
plug here.
Yep.
We also run a policy building 101 workshops on
Oh, that's
Tuesdays
right.
and Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern. We're going to go over more, kind of like it's literally 101 stuff about cybersecurity, what we can be doing. And we go over things like risk assessments and threat identification and all that kind of good stuff. So there's many, many different avenues to go down with Exostar and to educate yourself as to how you're going to be meeting these requirements.
Great. Thanks so much, Sean. Again, everyone, thank you for joining us and have a great day.